Welcome everyone to our next panel, Controlling the Chaos with Smart Technology, powered by Alvarado. Please welcome to the stage Beth Paul, General Manager at Bon Secure Wellness Arena, Brian McNeil, VP of Sales, Sports and Entertainment at Alvarado, and David Garcia, SVP of Experience and Innovation at the Atlanta Hawks and State Farm Arena. Welcome to the stage, everyone.
I appreciate it.
So, Brian, why don't you kick us off? Brian has a very quick presentation for us, and then we will get into the discussion. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. So, obviously, the topic is talk about chaos and whatnot. I mean, wanted to kind of put together just a quick little slide presentation to kind of kick things off. Really, obviously, we can describe the last year or so however we really wish. But bottom line is obviously it's been very chaotic. But at the same time, really what we've seen throughout that whole process, and I think a lot of these venues have seen the same thing, is it also presents opportunity. So I thought this was always kind of a very interesting quote, and to really kind of take an interesting perspective, not only as far as what's going on now, but as kind of things progress, well into the future. And really where we kind of focus on, at least on the Alvarado side, is we always kind of look at primary entry control as far as getting into these these different venues. And so where we talk about opportunities as far as where maybe the chaos even starts, obviously it's going to start as far out from that, from that point of entry, into those venues. And that's really where, kind of our focus has been, throughout the history of our company. And so, when you look at chaos, there's a multitude of different reasons what might be, causing that chaos. Could be even, even beyond, what's going on with, the public health crisis with COVID. If you're just going through, massive renovations, maybe venue construction, obviously there's always, there's been a lot of discussion around kind of making that quick shift going over to mobile ticketing and all the different types of media now that's available to, to patrons as they're entering in these venues. Even just looking at, just guest experience overall, budget cuts, staff shortages. I mean, there's just a multitude of different things that everybody's kind of facing right now, kind of on top of what's going on, with COVID. And so really what we've kind of seen, interestingly enough, is, we can kind of talk about this here in a little bit, is, there's been obviously a big shift towards like self-service technologies. And so, there's been a pretty big shift towards like all the pedestals and a bunch of barrier-free type of solutions. But really what we've seen from a vendor perspective over the last 6 months, 9 months, 12 months has really been this quick shift back towards the turnstile. So I thought this was kind of an interesting, take on this is, don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years. And, really that really kind of depends on maybe where you are around the world, kind of what that focus has been. I mean, there's still a number of locations that are very dominant, turnstile oriented. But what we've seen here in North America is, kind of taking a different look on, how do we not only control what's, going on with COVID and, the social distancing and touchless and all this good stuff, but how do we do this as effectively as possible? And that's really where the turnstiles come into play. But it's not what you're kind of thinking when that old school clickety-clank type of turnstile. We're talking about some really elegant type stuff. And having said that, I actually, I'd reached out to Beth and David. Obviously, they were, kind of ahead, really ahead of the game, especially in the case of like State Farm Arena. They rolled out, a few years back, so they were certainly well ahead of the game, as it relates to COVID. And then Bon Secure, here recently, they were one of the front runners that were one of the first ones that, to reopen and take advantage of this stuff. So that's it.
Great. Thank you, Brian. I love the quote, don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years, the turnstile. Let's get into that eventually. And I want to jump back to that because I want to ask you the question, why? Why is the turnstile back? But we'll get to that eventually. But why don't I start with Beth? Beth, Brian mentioned that you've actually been hosting events for a while now. You've been fortunate enough to host it, I think you said, since May of last year. Tell us why you were able to do so quickly, and in particular, talk about some of the entry technology that Brian's able to offer, but also just generally, like May seems so close to March for a lot of people here. Tell us why you were able to do it and do it successfully.
Sure. Yes, of course, March and April were full of questions and uncertainty, and we still are in that. scenario. But there were smaller community events where we were the only piece of real estate in town that could accommodate a socially distanced crowd. And again, where Brian mentioned the quote about opportunity, we found opportunity and really determined that we could do it in a safe way. We always put social responsibility at the top, but we were able to do both. And the timing was really interesting for Alvarado. We had been researching the technology. I think we'd probably already even been down to David's arena at State Farm to research the product prior to COVID. And so what COVID did was presented an opportunity from some funding that came along with that to fast track our purchase. Mm-hmm. So we were able to, it was a solution for the chaos that was present even before COVID, and then it's the solution for a more touchless, frictionless environment in this COVID pandemic time that we live in. So,
what did you have in place, Beth, before you switched to Alvarado?
So the events that we actually held in May and June, we just had the handheld ticket scanners for a Ticketmaster building. So those that hardware that's pretty evident in a lot of arenas, and during that time frame, when we were presented with COVID, we just did additional PPE for those staff members, mask, a shield, a plexiglass, those types of things to protect not only the fan but the staff as well.
Got it. And tell us about the events that you were hosting then in May. Specifically, what were they? How were they maybe different from what you're doing now, or what Brian does now at State Farm?
Sure. I mean, there's the community events that are really important to arenas. So there were high school graduations. So there was a lot of discussion about not having a high school graduation, and for 14 high schools in Greenville County. And we were able to come up with a solution together. So typically you wouldn't even ticket a graduation. It's a general admission event, and you come in with your friends or your family. And so we just kind of reimagined what that looks like. We ticketed it. We needed a solution for weapons detection and scanning. It had to be reserved seating, which it's never been in the past. And it really worked out well. And it was, it was sort of a grind. We didn't have much staff here to work, but we got it done. So.
And am I right that in the early stages, May and June, you were still using the handheld green scanners? And then when did you transition to some of the services that Brian offers?
Oh gosh, the install date it's about in that time frame, because we were working on the actual design. So it's August, September. We had it in place for hockey, which started in December time frame.
Got it.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I recall when we were prepping for this, a story about a decision you made, which I think is an interesting decision, right? Like how to actually place the turnstiles versus where to place the security check. Walk us through that decision process and what you were considering and ultimately what you decided.
Sure. So we also took this opportunity to invest in weapons detection. So we installed a Evolve system. And there was a lot of discussion surrounding, does weapons detection come before ticket scanning or vice versa? And both systems were such an improvement from what we had in efficiency that there could have been a bottleneck at either place. But we ultimately decided also in conjunction with the fire marshal. I would recommend getting your fire marshal involved very early on in the process to put weapons detection first. If there was an issue with Evolve or identifying a threat, that would be in more imminent risk, I would say, than a duplicate ticket or a fraudulent ticket or something like that. We're a little bit, we have some space constraints, so there's not a tremendous amount of space between weapons detection and ticket scanning, but that's ultimately what we went with. We haven't had a good test yet, just because of we've been restricted on capacity since COVID. But so far it works well. We did find, though, again, in this COVID time, that we may need to hold a guest in front of weapons detection so that we could maintain social distancing. I mean, we only have 12 feet in between the two systems, so one family could get in. But I think that in time, and as customers become more fluent in working the technology, that'll work itself out.
Interesting. David, let's jump to you. I know you've been working with Brian for a while, even before COVID, but I'd be curious to hear kind of what those solutions were, what the challenges were pre-COVID that you wanted to solve with the technology, and then maybe how those challenges and solutions changed slightly and offered a different solution, or maybe it just accelerated an issue that you saw, and all of a sudden the technology you had in place was able to address the challenge you saw.
Yeah, and first of all, I want to say thank you for having me and Brian for inviting us here. Really, for us, the buzzword back then was frictionless. And the pandemic really, just changed that word to contactless. But the things we were trying to solve were the same. So we're trying to see how fast and how quickly could we get people in the building. We're trying to, get rid of some of those friction points, some of those lines and hassles. So when we opened up in 2018, we had a goal to get everybody into the building in 10 minutes or less. We're getting, 66 to 70% of people into the building in 5 minutes or less. And a big part of that is the Alvarado, turnstiles. And so going back to 2015, when I first got introduced to the product, we actually hired a group of Disney industrial engineers to study handheld scanners versus pedestal scanners versus barrier turnstiles. And what we found were the barrier turnstiles were by far the quickest. And the plus or the benefit was, it was the first time I saw somebody scan a ticket and be like, wow, that was cool, right? Because it was unique and unexpected in a sporting environment. So that was another added benefit that we saw. Frankly, I would say it hasn't changed much for us from a COVID perspective. Again, frictionless and contactless is saying the same thing in two different ways. So we were fortunate enough to be well prepared for when this hit from an entry perspective.
Brian, let's jump to you quickly. Let's go back to that quote. Don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years, the turnstile. Why? Why is it that you find that people, as David said, think the turnstile is great?
I mean, I think now more than ever, it's something that checks all the boxes. I mean, there's obviously, there's other solutions out there, and obviously, we do a lot of self-service type products in general. I mean, pedestals for us had been kind of a staple over the last few years, but I think when COVID hit, I think people started taking a step back and looking, okay, how do I really try to, eliminate staff? How do I create more distance? How do I effectively, fully automate that entire process as much as possible? And that's the whole purpose of the turnstile. I mean, it's literally, you can have, one person monitor a bank of turnstiles. It really controls that ingress flow. I mean, again, you've still got all that self-service as far as the contactless, goes, and supporting all the media that's being rolled out. But really, at the end of the day, it's about automation, and doing more with less. And so, the nice thing for us is, we've made turnstiles for years. And so ultimately what we ended up doing, and I actually think maybe State Farm might have was one of the first couple venues where we had taken kind of this element from our security product lines, where we do a lot of corporate environments, the Amazons of the world and Home Depots and, all these big corporate facilities. And we merged it together with kind of our competence on the sports and entertainment side with all the validation. And, we really kind of merged those technologies together to where, I think on the turnstile side, kind of what David's talking about, where you've got this kind of wow factor. It's definitely got this not your traditional look, and that's why we've seen kind of this quick uptick, in the use of, what we kind of refer to as like a speed lane, per se.
Interesting. David, let me jump back to you a little bit. First of all, tell us how many fans you're allowing into the arena now. And then you had said that, not a whole lot has changed because you had this tech in place already. Do you see some changes that may have to be made when you are able to bring fans back in full capacity because of additional restrictions around COVID?
Yeah, so right now we're about 3,000 fans in the socially distanced capacity, and we've been running since mid-January and have kind of ramped up to that number. We are potentially, that could increase if vaccinated sections and things like that come into play in the near future. The one thing that has changed is COVID has introduced a new step in the entry process, right? Now it's health screening, then security, and then ticketing. So that health screening process for us starts with the health survey, For certain people in certain areas of the building, they do have to go through a rapid COVID test. So they get tested, wait 15 minutes in their car, and then come in. So it has added an extra step. And we've had to reconfigure some of our gates to allow for social distancing and new queue lines and things like that. I think some of the other technologies that we're looking into that maybe have accelerated a bit because of this fall again into that frictionless space. So we're doing a test pilot right now in our courtside club with long range RFID, where those people that get tested get a pass and they just walk in and out of the club. We know exactly how many people are in a club at any given time, and we can greet them by name and do some things for personalization. Another item similar would be for merchandise. We're doing a pilot on an expedited checkout that uses RFID tags on all of your merchandise, and then you can scan 20 items at once and then self-checkout on a tablet or eventually on your phone. So it's a lot of the same types of concepts, and trying to figure out where else can we apply it across the building experience. So it started with entry, and now it's started to get into other parts of the fan journey.
Interesting. And the rapid testing, is that for employees, or is that actually for fans who are coming in? Some fans go through the rapid testing.
That is for fans. So anyone who sits courtside or within 30 feet of the court have to be tested.
Interesting. Excellent. Beth, tell us some more about the experience thus far. Tell us about the capacity you are allowed to have in, and tell us about some of the changes that you might have to further implement when you are able to bring in additional capacity.
Sure. We are at about 4,000 capacity. I think I would expect that will increase over the summer, and hopefully late summer, early fall, we'll be back to 100%. So I think that I'll echo, I think, what Brian and David said. Just the aesthetic of Alvarado seems to do a lot for not only staff, but for fans. It is a very sophisticated technology. I agree 100% with David said. Nobody ever says, wow, when you scan your ticket. It's just not something that happens in our industry. And so I think that that's been really important. I think that also staffing, of course, there's some benefits to reducing the number of staff you need if you're in a cost savings mode, if that's your goal. If that's not your goal, you're able to take those resources and deploy them to some other areas in your facility that where frictionless and having, that need a personal touch. And so I think that's been a benefit that we have, that we've been able to take care of in terms of, more custodians or more operational, more maintenance people, because they can't work side by side. So it's freed up some actual human capital to work in other areas, which has been really interesting. It's done tremendous. It's helped us tremendously in staff morale. And I would say guests too. So what David's goal of getting everybody in 10 minutes or less, that's unless they stop by the box office, that's probably their first impression of their experience, and it has to be done right. So their wait or not a wait is their first impression. How quickly they can get through weapons detection without being feeling harassed or whatever those emotions might come with weapons detections, to moving quickly through ticketing. If you can get through those three things, you've checked off the first 3 touch points that have been really successful. So that's why I think, for some it should be a priority. Those are going to be your first touch points with your guests.
Yeah, interesting. And speaking of those touch points, Brian, maybe talk a little bit about some of the, I'll say, non-quantitative things that you see customers benefiting from doing this, right? Like maybe as simple as like the ability of a customer service person to smile and say hello, as opposed to just looking down at the scanner. How do you have those conversations with your customers? Yeah,
that's really been the whole shift towards self-service in general. Obviously the nice thing is that we've kind of heard that same dialogue here recently, is how quickly things have changed during this process in terms of expediting technology deployments. And even just, you go to your everyday, CVS of the world, and people are using more and more self-service type technologies. They are so much more used to it. Now when they're coming back in these venues, they expect it. But I think, when you're talking turnstiles and, whatnot, it's really kind of having this concierge type of effect, kind of what Beth was talking about is, the staff themselves are serving different roles now. Now they're welcoming guests. I mean, they're able to pay attention to, if something looks kind of off, what's going on, like, hey, alerting security staff, like keep an eye on that person over there. Something looks a little shady over there. That's really been kind of the big focal point as it relates to general customer service and again, talking about like the frictionless and just having that, enticing experience right from the get-go. So.
We talk about the entry process and speeding that up and how important that is. What about when fans are actually in, right? I assume that in limited capacity, you have less concerns about congestion and people moving throughout the venue. But when you do bring fans back, ultimately, I would think that that's going to become an important thing. Let's talk about the next step, right? You're through the gate and all of a sudden you have to move to where you need to go. Am I right in saying that right now that's probably not as much of a concern, or am I wrong about that? And how are you going to address it when you do bring more fans back? David, maybe if you don't mind, why don't I start with you?
Yeah, it really depends on what part of the experience you're talking about. So, coming in, getting to your seats, concession stands, with 3,000, people in a building for 17,000 people, it's not that big of an issue. But other areas, so for example, our merchandise shop, which is 2,500 square feet, we've got a line out the door in order to maintain the proper social distancing and the capacity within that store. So it's very dependent on specific clubs. Again, our courtside club, for example, can normally put in 650 to 700 people. Right now, we can't put in more than about 85 and still maintain that social distancing. So throughout the entire experience, you've got to kind of tweak and adjust different specific spaces. But overall, what we've seen is our survey scores and our ratings are as high as ever. And I think a big reason why is with fewer people, a lot of the things that people complain about, which are lines and hassles, have kind of gone away. Yeah, so that is one of the positives that we've seen.
Beth, anything to add to that?
No, we've seen some interesting, we have season ticket holders that are here for hockey and their ticket, they've become accustomed, they really enjoy the extra space. It's like getting on an airplane and nobody sits beside you. It's like you hit the lottery. And so I think it's going to be really interesting, especially for season ticket holders for re-entry. Like, how do we re-enter into a more normal capacity? Because I think what we've gotten to is that like David said, our customer surveys are really positive. They're very comfortable with the protocols we have in place. And it's almost like a luxury to have that much space and not be bothered with lines. So I think that's going to be while people, I think, generally are very excited to be back in a full arena. I know I am. If you've been coming the whole time, it's going to be a wake-up call, I think.
Yeah, fair enough. I'll start this question with Brian, but really let's pass it on to everyone. But Brian, talk to us about additional partner and sponsorship activations that might be able to be utilized when instituting an Alvarado piece of technology, whether it's a turnstile or otherwise. Additional sponsor assets.
Yeah. So, when you're if you're talking turnstiles, turnstiles obviously they open up, certainly more elements of that. We're talking pedestals and suite scanners and those types of things. You're kind of limited a little bit more to the displays themselves. Mm-hmm. We actually put together a really nice utility that, you see a lot of these venues that, especially like the multi-purpose venues where, if you're flipping from a, Hawks game to a Post Malone concert or whatever, you can easily update all the content themselves that are on these, you really have to kind of look at these as digital assets, because this is what guests see. And it's almost eerily so how closely they pay attention to what's on that display. It's no longer the attendant that's only looking at that display. But one interesting tidbit, and David can attest to this. When you're talking even kind of the speed lines like they've got, they've etched in the venue, and I believe, David, you guys tied it into even some of your naming rights deals and stuff like that, right? So, there's obviously, there's different real estate to take advantage of, kind of across the board. So,
David, tell us more about that.
Yeah, no, it's as part of our naming rights sponsorship with State Farm, which came in when we renovated the arena. This was one of the assets that we put into the package, both the the logo on the doors and the acrylic themselves, as well as the designs that could go on the screen. So it just gives you some additional real estate and things that you can offer a sponsor. I frankly think the most important thing, though, is when you're putting a sponsor's name on it, you want it to work, and you want it to work well, and you want the guests that are using it to love it. And that's what we're getting. So it's a great partnership and a great way to add extra value to State Farm, because now their name is on something that's working really, really well.
Beth, have you been able to take advantage of that at all?
We haven't executed anything, but we've had some good conversation and used it as more of a part of a bigger package, like a customer service package. About right now it's a convenience store, and they're big into of course customer service. So we're kind of packaging it in with a few other benefits that we have throughout the arena, and it's working well. I mean, it is perceived as one of the best innovations or innovative approaches we've had to the guest experience thus far. So. Great.
We've got about a few minutes left, and I want to ask all of you a similar question, but I'll start with Brian. And Brian, the question is, what's next, right? What's in R&D that you're dreaming for? What might we see this year or in the years to come that's on your dream list?
Well, I mean, we continue the process. I mean, we've got some other products that are kind of in the cusp of being released here, hopefully in the next few months, that kind of take it even, take our experience even that much further. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we've been doing has really been building off of some of the technologies that have already been deployed as well, whether it's on the ticketing side and whatnot. I mean, we've been pretty fortunate to be very agile throughout, to where even we've got long-standing venues that have had the same product, same hardware, but then with some few tweaks to the software, it adds a whole new layer of functionality. I mean, we were talking, like David was mentioning on the NBA side, we're actually we've got an deployment right now where based on kind of like the flagging of different tickets, it's actually generating different types of displays and different types of functionality on the devices that to show negative COVID tests and, maybe some of these other secondary processes that, that want to be implemented, for designated fans and, designated locations around the venue. But yeah, I mean, we're constantly looking at what's coming next and, how quickly can we get that deployed, in conjunction with our stuff. So.
Thanks, Brian. Beth and David, I'll ask you the same question, Beth, and I'll start with you, but I'll tweak the question a little bit. What's on your dream list? And it doesn't necessarily have to be point of entry technology. What technology would solve a problem that you foresee in the future that you're going to need solved?
Oh boy. Well, I would agree with what, Brian said too. When you make such a large investment, right? Like you need to get the most mileage out of it. So philosophically, I do believe in layering when possible. Like you want to make, and also so that your customers don't have to keep getting accustomed to new things. We're creatures of habit at the end of the day. So I agree with that. And I think, I think there's a lot to do on the, perhaps other arenas are there. We're not there yet on the ticketing side. Like you said, like being able to flag certain tickets, use these technologies into certain spaces within our arena that we're not really doing now. It's still a very manual process. And then, what kind of data capture can we get out of these, the systems, and how quickly are people making their way to concession stands? How quickly are they going straight to their seat? Any kind of technology that can capture patterns and habits will eventually drive revenue, or the customer experience we're always interested in. So maybe nothing specific, but just those objectives are what we hope to achieve. So.
No, that's great. Thank you.
And then I just do what Brian does, what David does.
David, you've got the last word. So
I got to see what he's doing at State Farm.
Yeah, we're happy to host anytime you want to come. So for me, there's a couple of things. One, it's the concept of just walk in, just walk out. So from an entry perspective, Evolve has actually done a great job with their new product of, you just walk through. How do we continue to extend that through the ticketing experience where you still have your barrier, your turnstile there for the support that you need, but you don't have to pull your phone out and scan it. There's an ability to just kind of walk through and really create a frictionless environment from a merchandise or a food and beverage perspective, in the sense of just walk out. Like, I'm paying for it without having to do anything. It's that Amazon Go style, a bunch of different ways you can accomplish that with different technologies. The second piece is personalization. So one of the things that we have seen throughout the pandemic, and for us specifically, we use Clear for that health survey, but we're having everybody come in and everybody now identify themselves. And when you know who people are, you can create a different experience for them. So as we start to go through the future, the pandemic has made it okay for people to give information that maybe otherwise they wouldn't have. Now we have to show them where the value is. And so, it's looking for ways to really enhance their experience by making it custom to each fan coming in the building.
David, Beth, and Brian, thank you so much for your time. This was great. Momentarily, we will join our Sport Techie Pro members in the Pro Networking Lounge to answer questions that you may have. But first, a couple announcements. This concludes our Venue Tech track. So thank you very much for joining us for all of the content that was on this track. The next track is on partnership adaptation and ROI. Make sure you check that out. There's a few panels that are up in store for you next. And then also, if you want to dive deeper on that subject, we have a Sport Techie Pro Day. That's a single day event on a specific subject within sports technology. We have a Sport Techie Pro Day on that subject, and it's on May 5th, and you can register for that now. Thank you all so much. We'll see you in the networking lounge, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.